All right, guys, welcome back to the Chessboard Ape channel. We're going to start here at the very beginning. This channel is for beginners, or if you're coming back to the game maybe after decades off. We're going to start off with how to move the pieces. I'm going to do some short explainer videos from chess.com. Remember, you don't have to be a chess.com member. You can also get a free membership at chess.com. I'm not affiliated with chess.com. Hope to be one day. Anyway, let's get on with this short explainer video, and then I'm going to show you how to move the pieces. Here we go.
Chess is one of the oldest and most recognized games in the world. It is an exciting game of strategy and planning, which is why it is seen as a symbol of intelligence. However, chess is easy to learn and can be enjoyed by anyone at any level. Chess is played on an 8x8 board with 64 squares and 32 pieces, and the game is all about checkmating the king. Once the king is in checkmate, which we'll explain later, then the game is over. So to start, let's meet the king. Even though the king is the most important piece in chess, it isn't the most powerful. The king can only move one square at a time in any direction. Here are the squares where the white king can currently move. Here's one move. Now the king could move here, and here's another king move. In chess, both players have identical sets of pieces. You have a king, and so does your opponent. Each player will take turns making a move until the game is over. Now that you've learned how the king moves, it's your turn to practice moving the king.
Okay, I don't think we really need to do that. We can go right on and setting up the board and get into it. That's pretty self-explanatory. Let's move on. All right, now that you know the king, let's move on and show you how the queen moves.
The king might be the most important piece in chess, but the queen is by far the most powerful. Like the king, the queen can move in any direction, forward, backward, to the sides, as well as diagonally. Unlike the king, the queen can move as far as she wants in any direction. The one thing the queen can't do is jump over other pieces. Let's look at some queen moves. In this position, the queen could go all the way up the diagonal. She could slide all the way across the board. She could now move all the way down here. Or she could make some shorter moves, like here, here, and here's another queen move. Earlier, we mentioned that the queen cannot jump over other pieces. In this position, let's say the queen wants to get to this square. Notice that the king is currently in the way of the queen. So the queen would have to move to another square first, and only then, on the next turn, could the queen move here. Now that you've learned how the queen moves, it's your turn to practice moving the queen.
Okay, once again, I don't think we need to get into all of that. You understand how the queen moves. Let's move on to the next piece. All right, now we're going to be covering the rook, the pieces in the corners. Let's get going.
After the queen, the rook is the second most powerful piece. It can move up, down, and to the sides as far as it wants, but the rook can only move in straight lines. Like the other pieces we've looked at so far, the rook also can't jump over any other piece. Let's take a look at some rook moves. In this position, the rook could move straight up. It could slide to the corner. It could move all the way down the board. Now it could swing to the other side, or it could make some shorter moves, like here and here. Now that you've learned how the rook moves, it's your turn to practice moving the rook.
And you guys can see, like right here, they have a start button. You want to click on the start. What it's going to do is it's just going to give you, a little short task. The rook wants to travel up and reach the other side of the board in just one move. Can you find the move? Right? So here's your rook. It's only one piece. We're going to go to the other side of the board, select, left click on the rook, and left click where you want it to go, and bingo. That's it. All right, so that's the rook. All right, next piece we're going to go on to is the bishop. I like the bishop. It's taken me a while to get used to it, but let's watch how the bishop moves.
The bishop is one of the most interesting pieces in chess because it can move as far as it wants, but only on diagonals. The bishop, just like the other pieces that we've met so far, cannot jump over other pieces. This means that the bishop has to stay on the same colored square it starts the game on for the entire game. In chess, you get two bishops. This bishop is called the light squared bishop because it can only travel on the light squares. Meet the other bishop that you have in the game, the dark squared bishop. It moves exactly like the light squared bishop, but only on the dark squared diagonals. Now that you've met both bishops, let's take a look at how they move. With just one move, the dark squared bishop can enter the longest dark square diagonal on the board. Let's do the same with the light squared bishop. Now, notice no matter how many bishop moves we make, the bishops never cross paths. They never block each other. And the reason why is because they're on opposite colored squares, so they never interfere with each other. They make a good team. Now that you've learned how the bishops move, it's your turn to practice moving the bishops.
All right, so that's pretty simple. Let's move on. Now, here's a piece that is very tricky to figure out, and it seems, at least for me, I'm a pretty slow guy. That's why the channel is called Chessboard Ape. I'm not very bright, but moving the knight and finding knight moves is sometimes very difficult. Let's watch a video.
The knight is perhaps the most fun piece in chess. It is the only piece in chess that does not move in some sort of straight line. It moves in a strange L shape. The other interesting thing about the knight is it's the only piece in chess that can jump over other pieces, like this. It takes a little practice to understand exactly how the knight moves. It goes 2 squares in one direction and then 1 square to the side, like this. Highlighted are all the possible squares the knight can move to on the next turn. Notice it always moves in the same pattern. 2 to the side and over 1, like this. Or like this. Up 2 and over 1. Or down 2 and over 1. And notice that the knight moves from a light square to a dark square. And then on the next turn, it moves from a dark square to a light square. The knight always switches colors with each turn it makes. Now that you've learned how the knight moves, it's your turn to practice moving this fun and tricky piece.
And since this one is a tricky piece, let's go ahead and click the start, see what it asks us to do. The knight wants to reach the top of the chessboard in a single move. Can you find the move? So remember how the knight moves. Remember he said it's like in this L-shaped pattern? See how many squares that covers? It's pretty neat, right? And so imagine if that was in the center of the board. Great job. The knight jumps to the top of the chessboard. Hit next. It's going to ask you to do the next thing. Knights love to be in the center of the action. Move the knight into the center of the board. So remember, you're going to go over and up. You're going to make an L pattern, right? We can't go over and up here because the bishop is already on that square. We can't do an L shape here because the rook is on that square. All right, so we're going to do what it asks us to do. Left click on the knight, left click on the square in the center of the board. Okay, so I think you guys got the idea. Let's move on. And this piece right here is often, at least for me, was a piece I've always never really considered. I never saw the value in pawns. It's not until a little bit later on that I've been playing this game that I can see how valuable the pawns are. So let's have a look.
The pawn sounds like it is the humblest of chess pieces, but it is really one of the most powerful. When working together, pawns are the soul of chess. Pawns have a few strange rules, so make sure to pay attention. Pawns can only move straight forward, and they can only move 1 square at a time. However, if it is their first move of the game, they can choose to move 2 squares forward if there is nobody blocking them, as pawns cannot jump over other pieces. Remember, the pawn can choose to advance 1 or 2 squares only on the first move. On all other moves, the pawn advances 1 square. Pawns are also the only piece in chess that cannot move backwards. One other thing that makes them strange is that while they can only move straight forward, pawns can only capture diagonally, and they can only capture 1 square away diagonally, even if it is their first turn. We will explain capturing in one of the next lessons. Let's see some pawn moves.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do this.
In this position, since this pawn has yet to move in the game, white decides to move it 2 squares forward. Black, on the other hand, only advances this pawn 1 square. Remember, even though you can move your pawn 2 squares on its first move, you're not forced to do so. White now advances the pawn forward, and now both pawns are blocked and cannot move. In this position, how many white pawns can move? If you said 1, you're correct. Notice that this pawn is blocked by the black pawn directly in front of it. Remember, pawns cannot move backwards. White now has the option to move this pawn up 1 square. Notice this pawn cannot move 2 squares forward because the black pawn blocks it. Now it's your turn to practice using the pawns.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do this little lesson here. Again, select the start button. I really think the pawns and the knights are hardest when you're brand new, at least it was for me. White's pawn can move 1 or 2 squares on its first turn. Play the move that puts the pawn into the center of the board. Okay, so we're going to select 2 spaces, right? Right in the center of the board as far as we can go. All right, pawn jumps into the center of the board. Next, white has 2 pawns, but only one of the pawns can move 2 squares. Which one is it? So have a look. Which one is it? Right, because this piece is already moved. We could see this piece hasn't. Boom. Okay? So I think you kind of get the hang of that. This is something you can go back and play around with. Now let's talk about the fun stuff. The pawns are the only piece on the board that can advance to the other side of the board. If they make it all the way across safely, they can become whatever piece they want. So let's listen to the video.
Remember, your pawns are the only pieces that cannot move backwards. So what happens when they reach the other side of the board? They get a promotion. You must trade your pawn for another piece. It can be a knight, a bishop, a rook, or the powerful queen. It cannot stay a pawn, and it cannot become a king. Also, it does not have to be one of the pieces already captured in the game. Every pawn has the potential to be promoted into a queen. You could trade it for another queen and have 2 queens on the board, which is incredibly powerful. Now, let's practice promoting some pawns.
Right, let's do this. Should be fun. So select start. White has 2 pawns. Can you promote one of them to the strongest possible piece on the next turn? Well, you can see this guy's way back here, so he's obviously not the one. So let's take a look at this guy. Advance forward. And let's select the queen. Boom. And you'll notice now we're attacking that piece, which is called check. All right, you guys, I'm going to go ahead and end it there. This is the channel, Chessboard Ape. You've seen it. You've obviously clicked here, so you've been here before. We'll go ahead and wrap this thing up, and we'll come back tomorrow with another video. Take care, guys.